And we have breaking news in the Brown University shooting. Authorities are giving an update on this manhunt. Let's listen in.
All right, so we are listening into this press conference right now, and it looks like officials are just pulling up and walking us through this new video they just released, enhanced video showing the person of interest in this Brown University shooting that they just released late this afternoon. At first, over the weekend, we didn't have much to go off of, but they have been releasing more video, enhanced video, to hopefully give people out there a better idea of who this may be. And the hope is that somebody will come forward with who this person could be in this investigation.
Yeah, and over the last few days, officials in Providence have been stressing the community members, businesses, anyone who may be in and around the Brown University campus in the city of Providence to come forward with surveillance video like the images that you're seeing so they can continue to push these out to members of the press and the public to try and get an idea of who the person of interest is that they are looking for in this case.
And really, these videos show the east side of Providence on Saturday afternoon before the incident. The shooting happened around 4. Now officials are speaking. Let's listen in.
And the reason we have shown these videos, there's a purpose, right? So as you can see, they're enhanced photos, there's enhanced video footage. And so we're asking the public to ensure that they can see them. They can see here that you want to focus on the body movements, the way the person moved their arms, the body posture, the way they carry their weight. I think those are important movement patterns that may help you identify this individual, which is extremely important. Another thing that we're going to ask the public is if you have any type of camera system, including Teslas, in your property. And this video that you just saw behind me, it all comes from the residential block of Waterman Avenue, Power, Ives, and Hope Street. And it's those residential areas that we're asking the public to look, if you have any camera systems or any Teslas, like I mentioned, that you look at that footage and that you can reach out to us and please provide us anything that you have. And we're asking you to go back at least a week to do that. And the reason for that is because on Saturday night, the day of, we actually learned that this individual was in that neighborhood at around 10:30 in the morning. We also know in this profession that many criminals will case out an area weeks and days prior. And so it's important for us to ensure that we can have you look at that and help us. And the reason for that is because our offices, our agents, are looking at terabytes of data. And we're looking for a moment that is shorter than somebody taking a breath. It's incredible hard work to do that. And so we're asking the public to assist us with that. The other thing is the tip center. We have been receiving hundreds of tips. However, we're about close to 200 actionable tips that we're still conducting investigations on, which is incredible and is important. Again, keep in mind that this video footage is extremely important to us. And one more thing here that as a reminder, please remember that the number that we need you to call is 401-272-3121, as well as the link that the FBI provided, which is fbi.gov, Brown University shootings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel. Now we'll hear from FBI Special Agent in Charge, Ted Dux.
No, thank you, Mayor, and good evening. My name is Ted Dux. I'm the Special Agent in Charge of FBI Boston. On the heels of this tragedy, the strength and resilience of the people of Providence is a powerful reminder of the bonds that unite us. The men and women of the FBI, along with the law enforcement team standing before you, carry the victims with us as we work around the clock to bring the individual responsible for their injuries and deaths to justice. Today, the FBI is working with Brown University to do everything we can to provide services to those impacted by this horrific shooting. The FBI has almost 30 victim specialists, special agents, and analysts from all over the country who are here in Providence to support our survivors, the victims, and their loved ones. The FBI Victim Services Response Team is one of the many specialized FBI assets that have been deployed here to assist. The toll this type of tragedy takes on victims and their families is immeasurable, and we ask everyone to respect their privacy at this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Agent. Next, Attorney General Peter Nerona.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a lot to add, other than that from my perspective, I think the investigation in a case like this, which is a challenging one, is going really well. On the third floor of this building, there are dozens of agents, detectives, led by Providence Police, prosecutors from my office, working to put together, and what you're seeing is just a portion of what they're working on right now. So they are literally, because I have seen at least part of it, the shift changes late at night. I think Rhode Islanders should take confidence in their work. They are veterans of what they do. They're smart, they're professional, and they're getting the resources from the mayor and the governor that they need, the state police as well, to get this job done, and I'm confident they're going to be able to do that. Just need a little bit of patience, as hard as it is to say that in this really horrible context. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Governor Dan McKee for an update now.
Thanks, Mayor. And right off the top, we're just making sure that the state is supporting Providence and Brown University, and then working with the FBI as well as our state police and the Attorney General to continue to provide information to the people in the state of Rhode Island. My information is that recently, today, we've met with all the university presidents in the state of Rhode Island. We know that we want to start a working group that will talk about enhancing the safety issues. And you'll see shortly that we'll be doing the same thing in terms of the mental health issues. And I think that's important as I'm out and about. We're hearing a great deal of anxiety coming from families and students and the general public. And that's one of the reasons why our state police has supported the Providence schools with presence as school begins and school ends in support of the mayor and his efforts to support the schools.
Thank you, Governor. We're also joined tonight by Brown University President Christina Paxson.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to begin by thanking the many law enforcement agencies who continue to work around the clock on this case. It's very impressive. I also want to thank the mayor and the governor for their continued support. The primary point that I wanted to address before we get to questions is that Brown is deeply committed to the safety and security and well-being of our community. And I've been deeply saddened to see people questioning that. We understand that as time goes on, there is maybe a natural instinct to assign responsibility for a tragic event like this. Anxiety and fear is very natural, but the shooter is responsible. Horrific gun violence took the lives of these students and hospitalized others. And it's deeply sad and tragic that schools across the country are targets of violence. Brown is no exception. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement, and again, we thank the multiple agencies that have been working so hard day and night with increased patrols to keep our campus safe and to investigate this horrific shooting. Thank you.
Thank you, President Paxson. I'll give a couple updates on behalf of the city, and then we'll take your questions. First, as has been discussed many times, we continue to have enhanced police presence throughout the city of Providence to help bolster the confidence and provide a sense of additional security to our residents. Today, we were aided by neighboring municipalities in Central Falls and North Providence with supplemental officers. We're grateful to our neighbors for sticking up and standing up with Providence. The state police continues to be an incredible partner, and I thank the governor and Colonel Weaver for their partnership. Providence Public Schools remain in session. Friday is the last day of school before winter break. Spent some time at our schools again today. As has been the case in the past, The schools in the area of Brown are having regular police presence, and because of the assistance of the Rhode Island State Police, we've been able to provide additional police presence and coverage to other schools in Providence, and we thank them for that. When I was at one of our elementary schools this morning, the faculty were having a brief meeting before kids started to arrive, and in discussion with some of the teachers, I asked how they were doing, and one of the teachers said what I think a lot of us are feeling. She said, you know, it's hard, but I'm putting on a good face for the kids. We need to be here for them. And I think that's how a lot of our residents feel right now, which is that we are taking very tentative steps forward, but we're doing it for one another. And so I do want to thank our educators at this time. They're being asked to go to school right now. Our principals are asked to be going to school right now for the sake of the families and the kids. And at that same school, there was a second grader literally skipping to the front door because he's a second grader, and he doesn't know everything that's going on in this scary world right now. And so the strength of the adults has allowed that little kid to skip to school this morning, and so I want to thank all of my fellow residents of Providence for putting on a strong face for the sake of others at this time. There were questions yesterday, and so I'll also just give a brief update on the health status of the survivors. If folks will recall, there had been 8 hospitalized. 1 has since been discharged. There had been 8 hospitalized. 1 has since been discharged. The 7 that remain in the hospital, 1 is in critical status, 5 in critical but stable status, although healthcare providers report that they are improving, and 1 in stable status. Those are the 7. 1 in critical, 5 in critical but stable, 1 in stable status, and 1 discharged since the last time we made comments about their safety and recovery from the podium. Now we'll open it up to questions.
En español para el jefe de la policía, Pérez, si puede responder nuevamente, repetir un poco de estos videos, en qué áreas se están concentrando, dónde quieren que las personas vean esos videos y cuánto tiempo antes incluso quieren que reciban o revisen esos videos de vigilancia.
Yeah, so the question was if I could just repeat what I stated earlier in English as far as what occurred here, the reasons of the video, and what I was requesting from the public. So, estamos pidiendo al público verdaderamente que el video lo que hicimos fue que lo aumentamos para que vean la manera en cómo camina la persona, cómo mueve sus brazos, los movimientos que tiene. Eso es muy importante para que de pronto nos ayuden a que ellos se identifiquen a esta persona, importantísimo. Lo segundo es que estos videos fueron tomados más que todo en una área residencial que incluye la calle Hope, la calle de la Waterman Avenue, la calle de la Power Street y la calle de la Ive Street. Entonces es importantísimo, estamos pidiendo al público que identifique si tiene sistemas de cámaras, también como vehículos de los Tesla, que tiene ese tipo de data, para que nos los mande a nosotros, importantísimo para nosotros verificarlo, y que vayan una semana atrás del incidente. Porque hay una información que tenemos que esta persona a las 10 de la mañana del sábado fue vista.
Chief Ferris, you said that you believe this person was in the neighborhood at 10:30. Clarify, you believe that was at 10:30 the morning of the shooting? And what do you believe he was doing there at that time?
Correct, and we have video footage of that, and we believe that he was actually casing out this area to commit the crime. That's a pattern that criminals do, and that's what he was doing.
Chief,
Go ahead.
Chief, yesterday the FBI described the person that we've been seeing in these images as a suspect. Today the language seems to be person of interest. Can you clarify, do you believe that this person that we're looking at is your shooter, is your shooting suspect?
Definitely, he's still a person of interest, and we're still investigating that to be able to get that answer. But we strongly believe definitely he's a suspect in the incident and a person of interest.
In the back. Go ahead.
An MIT professor died earlier this morning from gunshot wounds. Does that incident have any potential connection to this investigation?
Now that we know of, no.
In the back, sir.
To ask you, yesterday we were wondering about this person's age. Now that we've seen more video, again, a couple of days ago, I know you're saying 20s, so some talk about 30s, but just to help people at home, people seeing this video, do profilers or anyone in your department have any better understanding, a closer idea on his age? And the second part of that question is, can you now confirm that he has no connection as a past student or as a past staff member at the university?
So the first question, I'll tell you that when it happened on Saturday night, obviously it was chaos, and there was a witness that stated that he might have been in his 30s. At this point, we're still just looking at the picture. We haven't identified ages or anything to that point. And as far as whether he's a problem student or anything, we don't have any of those answers, no.
Colonel, in one of the new videos, prior to the shooting, this person of interest is seen running. At this point, do you have any inkling why he's running, where he's running to?
So, yeah, we're still investigating that, but we do know definitely that he was casing the area. And again, that's what criminals do prior to committing a crime.
Chris?
It appears that the FBI and PP, at least according to where I'm looking online, it looks like they're releasing separate videos at separate times. Are you guys still coordinating, or how are things working?
We are. You gotta understand that there's a lot of people upstairs, as the general stated earlier, and we're trying to ensure that we do this right job and collect the evidence and that we need, and we want to make sure that everybody has especially you guys in the public. One thing I want to make sure is that the community is safe, well-informed, and stay confident in the work that we're doing. So yes, there was a video that was released, but we also were working on another video, and the purpose of this press conference is to ensure that the public can see those videos showing movements, like I stated earlier, the way the person walks, the way they carry their weight. That's the importance. And so our video, the second video that we showed was the one that we needed to show the public.
Just
All right, please.
in terms of cameras inside and outside the engineering building, are those working at all? And if so, why not release some of those videos?
So the video that we showed you came from inside the building, and that's all we had at the moment. That's all we have at this moment. Correct.
Inside the engineering building, though?
I'm sorry.
It's from the outside of the building.
From the
I'm sorry.
outside, so do you have video from
Yes.
inside the engineering
Both
building?
inside and outside. I'm sorry, just outside. That's all we have, not inside. No, I'm sorry, just outside.
Are they going to be released anytime soon, the ones from inside the building?
That was released already. That was the outside of the building. We released
Yeah,
that.
let me just jump here and clarify, okay? So there is, for those of you who've been with us before, and I understand not all of you have been, there is video inside the building. There are cameras inside the building. What we have released to you are videos of this person of interest. So I want to be clear, because later on there may be other videos that get released in the course of a prosecution, likely will be at some point. They show things like chaos after the shooting. What they don't show is this person of interest, and so that's why we haven't released those videos, okay? What you do have are videos from a camera outside of the Brown building and other cameras from around the neighborhood that the good men and women in law enforcement located and have put together in this montage. And to your question, Chris, there are two versions of that video, but the bottom line is they, as I understand it, they depict the same thing, and number one, and number two, the agencies are working very, very well together, as I think the special agent in charge would agree.
Attorney General?
All right, so you've got a follow-up, and then we're going here.
Just to clarify, there's no clear video of the suspect inside the engineering building?
I just said that.
That's correct.
Now, can I just ask as well, further to the surveillance footage that you have received, I've been here since Saturday speaking to people who are living in the residential buildings around and in the businesses, and many of the store clerks there have told me it wasn't until this morning that the police have actually come to ask them if they had anything that they could offer, any CCTV or any evidence that they could provide. Why has it taken 3 days for these people to have the police come to them to ask them for assistance?
As I stated earlier, it's a residential block that includes a lot of homes, a lot of different camera footage, and it takes a lot of work in the sense that there's a lot of terabytes that we're looking at in order to be able to analyze it, pull what we need. And sometimes it's just a moment that we need, and it's shorter than somebody taking a breath, so it takes a lot of work. And then so once that leads us to a next location, and so we move strategically, we have to pull the video, download it, analyze it, investigate it, and then move forward. It takes time.
Mr. Attorney General?
Yeah, I just want to jump in there too, because I think, I want to clarify in a sense what the chief is saying. Is that you start in the grid, in the first instance, that's closest to Brown. It takes a lot of work to canvass that area, and then you build out as you learn more about the path of travel. So it's entirely possible that tomorrow we'll be canvassing places that we haven't canvassed yet, because we're working out with the resources that we have.
Dan, go ahead.
We have a question and a follow-up, right?
Yes.
My first question, Attorney General, to follow up on my colleague, this is the question I asked on Saturday night, which is, so there's cameras in the hallway, but they don't show the suspect, or Brown is not releasing them, or you're not releasing them to us. How does a multi-million-dollar school not have a bunch of cameras in the hallway?
So let me try to explain that. So as President Paxton knows, there was a major addition put on that building within the last 5 years or so. That is a modern building attached to a much older one in the back. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me, at least, that there are cameras in the newer part of the building. And there is video footage, okay? So there's the back part of the building, old part, and front part, new part. The shooting occurs in the old part, towards the back, out towards Hope Street. In that older part of the building, there are fewer, if any, cameras in that location. I imagine because it's an older building. So as students are fleeing the area of the shooting into the new part of the building, there are cameras in that brand-new building that show that chaos. But the only video of the presumed, anticipated, suspected, however you want to define it, person of interest, you have it. We would release it if we thought it would be helpful in identifying this subject, because we are relying on the press and public to help get us there. There would be no reason for us to hold it back. We're looking for the best image we can.
Dan got a follow-up.
Attorney General, thank you for explaining that because it really clarifies it. Although I'm sure some people watching would think a multi-million-dollar school with a huge endowment could afford new cameras in an old building. That's my statement. Here's my question. If he's casing that area, Colonel, like you said, he had an intended target, which speaks to the motive. Did he have a target to kill one of the two people that were killed?
We're still investigating it, Dan, and it's something that we're trying to get the answers as well, so.
Patrick?
Yeah, for President Paxton, have you reviewed any communications to Brown before the shooting that revealed any kind of threat, any kind to anyone at Brown? And then since the shooting, I believe some web pages for students or faculty have been taken down. Is that a response to any external threats to anyone in the community?
We have been working very closely with law enforcement to provide them with all of the internal to Brown information that they need to do this investigation. It's their investigation, they're the professionals. So we're providing information, we're not in the job of reviewing it for them. I know nothing about web pages being taken down as part of this. It's the first I've heard of it.
In the back, yep.
You want people to feel safe. Can you say this person of interest is no longer in Providence, no longer in Rhode Island, are they out of the state? Do we have any sense at all?
I can't speak to the investigation, and if there's a follow-up for either the general or the colonel, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer it. But I'll restate what I've said several times now, which remains true as another day passes. Since the initial call came in at 4:05 p.m. on Saturday, we have not received, and this is now updated with another 24 hours have passed, a single credible, specific threat to the area, to the city related to this event, and as far as I know, to the state. And I know that this is a question that many people are struggling with, and it's difficult conversations that I've had with many of my constituents, including a very anxious parent this morning. The best information we have is that there is no credible, actionable, specific threat that has occurred since Saturday. And in order to enhance and ensure the safety of our community, we have stepped up law enforcement efforts throughout the city in a precautionary measure, in an abundance of caution, to try to give comfort and confidence to people who have to take the steps forward in their daily lives, who have to take their kids to school, who have to get to work. And that is the honest answer and the best answer we have at this time as the days continue to pass.
Mr. Mayor, with that, can you tell us where you believe he may be? Is he in the state? Is he in the area?
That question was asked as well, so Colonel, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, we'll continue to investigate that. That's not, listen, we're looking for the same answers as the mayor stated. We haven't really received any credible info as far as any other calls for that nature, but I'll tell you that we have enhanced our presence in a part of the city, and we're using every resource we have, and every call that comes in, we're responding to it immediately.
Pat.
Are you working with any neighboring states?
It's Pat, so we're working our way across the room here. Pat.
Pat Ford, Coalition Radio. In a case involving a hit-and-run accident in the vicinity of Brown University that was litigated by the Office of Attorney General Nerone in 2023, Brown University Police Detective John Remke stated that the university maintains several thousand video surveillance cameras and license plate readers on Brown University campus and surrounding campus. Now, this is in addition, obviously, to the Providence Police Data Center. Attorney General Nerone, your department litigated that case, ostensibly giving your department a thorough understanding of the landscape. Why isn't there more video or metadata, and were those cameras all operational?
Yeah, I can't speak to what was operational or wasn't, but I will say this, that, and I've answered this question a few times today, and I'll try to do my best to answer it again. So somebody reported, it might have been the Globe, that there are 800 cameras or so on the campus. It might have been the Globe. 1,200. But this building is on the very edge of the campus. If you know, I know that building well. I had two sons who spent a good chunk of their lives there. It's at the very edge of the campus. It's not in the heartland of the campus. It's not the green. And there are several greens. It's not any of the 3 greens as I remember them. So it's right on the edge of the campus, and where the shooting took place is at the very edge of that building on the edge of the campus. And so, as those of you who know Providence know, you are very quickly into a residential neighborhood, which is why the video footage you're seeing of this defendant's, person of interest movements, are pre and post shooting are in that neighborhood. So the building is on the edge of the Brown campus. Where the shooting took place is at the edge of that building, and then you're very quickly into a residential neighborhood. There is no footage, I'll try to say it again, there is no footage that depicts this individual that would be useful in identifying him that we have not released to you. And I think you can tell from, frankly, the not very helpful quality of the initial footage that our standard is pretty low. If we thought it was at all helpful, we would have and will release it.
John.
Follow-up question, real quick follow-up.
Colonel,
Hold on, sir.
Does Brown University or the federal government employ Stingray or any other mass surveillance equipment in and around the Brown University campus? And again, remember that the Brown University detective said that these applied and said that these cameras extend in the neighborhood. So the other question is, does mass surveillance by Brown University end at campus borders, or is there anything in the Thayer Street community, downtown area, or anywhere else in the community?
You asked me this question last night, Pat, and I don't have any knowledge of those systems.
With respect to the mayor, I'm not asking you, I'm asking the Attorney General or the FBI.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no mass surveillance. Well, first of all, I'm not sure what mass surveillance means, Pat, but by any standard, I wouldn't describe it as mass surveillance by Brown University. There are cameras that they have in place in an effort to protect their students. And unfortunately here, given location, given age of building, we just don't have additional video footage. Trust me, I wish we did, but we don't, and so we're doing everything we can to find additional footage from the neighborhoods, reinvent his path of travel, and continue to canvass for either people who may have seen him, encountered him, or who have video evidence that could supplement what you already have.
John.
I have a question for Agent Dox of the FBI. Agent, so this happened Saturday night, and then last night you have an MIT professor. I know the question was asked, but this has to work. What we see on this video seemingly is someone very cautious, almost like a professional, kind of like the DC pipe bomber that is circling several times. What information do you have? That MIT Jewish professor in Brookline was basically executed. Do you have any intelligence how that person was operating at?
You know, it's interesting. The Colonel Noble reached out to me very early. Their lead on that particular incident. He made sure that if there's any intelligence, any information in which is connected to what we have here, that they would share that. At this time, there seems to be no connection as it relates to that particular incident.
What, as a FBI agent following, what do you see in that individual who's walking? For example, you know, he's walking with his arms behind his back, and I've seen people talk about that's not like a young kid on a campus. That scene where he's you know walking, that's something more either European or Middle Eastern. What do you see so far in this video that we see of the suspect or a person of interest?
You know, I think the Colonel articulated in a sense what they see. I say from an FBI perspective, We have individuals that can hypothesize on that, our behavioral analysis unit, and those type of individuals. I will say I would be, I think, getting a little ahead of things if I give you kind of an inference of what I see in that particular behavior. It can mean a lot of things, to be truly transparent with you, and to get into the mind of an individual that would commit such a heinous act. That's a place in which I don't want to go right now. I'm not sure what was going on in that particular individual's head at that
But you
time.
would agree,
John, that's it.
this individual seems very calibrated.
Brian in the back.
President Paxson, clearly, as you stated, the shooter is to blame, but you're hearing a lot of questions about the lack of cameras. You mentioned you've heard some of the criticism. What is your response to parents as well who said they pay a lot of money for their kids to go to Brown? They're questioning the cameras, why the sirens didn't go off. Do you believe that Brown had the precautions and safety measures in place before the shooting that were appropriate and necessary?
I do. And in fact, I'm glad you mentioned the sirens, because I think there's been some misinformation about that. We have 2 security systems that we can activate in time of an emergency. One is a system that sends out text messages, phone calls, emails, and it was activated within minutes of the incident. Those messages went out to 20,000 individuals, so all alerts. We also have a system of sirens. There are 3 sirens placed across campus. Those get activated when there is a broad-scale emergency and we want people to rush into buildings. In the case of an active shooter, activating that system could have caused people to rush into Barris and Hawley. So that's not a system that we would ever use in the case of an active shooter. So,
Just to follow up. It does say on the website when it was launched that it is for an active shooter. So
it depends on the circumstances and where the active shooter would be, but you don't want to ever get people rushing into buildings that might be the site of an active shooting.
That's it.
That's
Brian.
my understanding.
Go ahead, sir.
do you have any evidence that suggests that the victim, Ella Cook, may have been targeted?
Colonel O'Donnell.
No, not at this point.
Yeah, agreed. Question over here. You mentioned you have over 200 tips.
Miss, we're working our way across, I'm sorry. Let's go ahead, Tom.
Attorney General Noronha, what are the characteristics of the guy in the first video that makes you believe that he's also the same guy in the video that was released yesterday, and then a follow-up for President Paxson?
Yeah, look, I think that that is an analysis that has been done by the agents and the detectives. And a lot of factors are going into that. A lot of it is being able to, and as I just saw upstairs, a really terrific job of tracing movements. And when you put movements and times together, it's easy easier perhaps is the best word, to identify them as the same person. Now, look, there are no absolutes in any investigation, and I'm not about to make absolute statements in this one either. But that's the general reasoning for why we've concluded that.
Just a follow-up to President Paxson. Right now, school break is pretty much underway for a lot of the university students. Have you met with your police department and the board of trustees on how you're going to secure the university going into the second semester? Are you making any changes to the way you guys operate?
Well, right now, we have been, the campus is emptying out first, as you said, but we still have staff and faculty and graduate students and international students who will remain on campus during the winter break. So it's still open. And right now, our focus is on getting as many sort of boots on the ground, people in cars. We have been really fortunate that the city and other municipalities have people who are helping us. People from the state. We also have security that we brought in from outside. I think over 60 people today were patrolling the campus. I was on campus walking around, and I couldn't turn around without seeing a security person. So we will continue that for as long as we think it's necessary. And right now, the campus feels very secure.
So no
Thank you.
changes.
Steve, I'm sorry, I missed you earlier.
No, it's okay. If someone were, Providence resident were to see someone who matched the description of the person of interest, how would they be sure that they weren't dealing with a federal ICE agent?
The tip line that we've been providing throughout the last several days, 401-272-3121, that call comes in here. and is answered in this building with Providence police professionals and our partners at the FBI. That is who's manning the phones, that is who's processing the tips, and we are encouraging anybody who has relevant information to please use that tip line, and they should know that that's who's on the other end of the phone. And again, if you have relevant information or information that you think might help us with this investigation, we encourage you to call.
But are there anything that could be differentiated between this person and an ICE agent who would be matched up walking through town and not be approached by the police in the same way this person was?
Again, we've worked really hard to build the trust of our community here in Providence, and I'm telling you that that phone number, 401-272-3121, rings in this building and is answered by Providence Police and/or FBI. Those are the agencies that are processing, running down, and investigating any relevant information, and we urge folks, if you have relevant information, to please use that phone number. Luke?
For the Colonel, do you have any indication as to whether all the interviews of the students in the classroom are completed? And is there any through line that you glean from those interviews?
We're still conducting those interviews as we speak.
Go ahead, please.
You mentioned that you have no idea if the shooter is still in the area. Have you been working with any law enforcement agencies in other states that are nearby?
Yes, we're working with every municipality here in the state of Rhode Island, and obviously every Massachusetts. Obviously we have conversations with them as well, but majority of the law enforcement that we're working with right now is our own, nearby municipalities, the Rhode Island State Police, and every agency that you can think of, federal agency in this building.
Are you working with agencies in Connecticut?
We're in conversations with them, but no, they're not here, no.
Amanda, if I could just jump in here, what's really critical first is that we identify who the person is. Once we identify who this person is, I believe we'll be able to locate him. It's very hard to hide in this country. But until you have a name, which is why we're working so hard to identify him, it's not particularly productive to reach out to law enforcement across the country as to who you're looking for, because we don't yet know who we're looking for. So that's why we have to identify the person. Once we've identified him, we'll know more information about where he's from and who his friends are and where he might go. So those are the things that we can do once we have an identification of this person. And that's why the team now is laser focused on identifying who this person is in this video. Amanda.
Question. I have some questions for the chief.
Yes.
The chief.
Amanda.
Just following up on another question that was just asked, I'm glad to hear that some of the students are beginning to recover. How many of the students who were inside that building and also outside have detectives been able to interview, and have they elaborated on anything that this man said? Allegedly, he yelled something in the classroom before opening fire. Did he appear to be wearing a bulletproof vest, and that's why he appeared bulky?
It's a good amount of interviews that have been conducted. We have re-interviewed several people. And so I just want to tell you that's part of the investigation right now. We'll continue to investigate, and we'll continue to speak with them. And like the general stated, listen, we're just trying to build the case here and make sure that we can move forward and continue the progress as we're doing. But the interviews are still being conducted.
But Chief, they haven't elaborated. Chief, they haven't elaborated exactly in what this man, if he did say anything, what he was yelling.
Yeah, no, I don't have that info, no.
Straight back, sir.
What do we know about the path of the shooter as they left Garrison Holly, and where do we lose sight of him?
So his movements were all in that residential block that I mentioned, between Waterman Avenue, Howard Street, I Street, Hope Street. It's all that block. The whole residential block that I just mentioned is where his movements were. And then obviously that's where we lose some sight of him somewhere around Governor Street.
This is after the shooting, Chief?
In the back there.
Correct.
So at that point, at any point, will there be kind of like a map put out as to which cameras you're seeing him on to kind of give an idea to the public of maybe my camera's there, maybe my Tesla's there, like you said?
Correct, yeah, great point, and something that we talked about just before I came down here to be able to release that map as well.
Chief,
Alex.
for the Colonel, do investigators know how many shots have been fired yet, and can you tell us that?
It's in our forensics unit, and obviously with the FBI as well. They're all there, and there was several rounds that were fired inside the building.
And just another follow, the image today
of the person of interest, they have a satchel. Is it known if there were additional weapons in there or magazines of some kind?
No, that's all we know, that it was just that one weapon that I mentioned the other day.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this might be a question either for President Hassan or the Colonel here. I wanted to follow up on the scrubbed internet pages that were mentioned. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's been a lot of speculation about what those scrub pages might mean. Can you help fact check, give us some information today about what this scrubbed individuals, about one very particular individual, does it have any connection to do with the shooting?
As I said before, I have no knowledge of any scrubbed pages. You can follow up with our communications office if you want to get more information, maybe tomorrow, but this is the first I've heard of it.
So I did, and then they directed me to Colonel Perez. Do you know anything about these individuals?
I do not know.
Go ahead, right behind, yes.
Hi, una pregunta para el coronel. ¿Qué es lo que ustedes ven en la descripción, en el lenguaje corporal de esa persona que los hace pensar que es una persona de interés? He hablado con personas de la comunidad que tienen cierta desconfianza porque ya liberaron a una persona que también era de interés. ¿Qué hace a esta persona la que pues, podría ser?
Yes, so the question is, what makes this person one of the suspects that we have that is a priority? And since we had released somebody already in the past, what makes this person the subject? So, la respuesta verdaderamente es que tenemos muchas indicaciones que este individuo es el que cometió esta tragedia. Y entonces estos videos que mostramos es por esa razón. La investigación nos está llevando en ese progreso a determinar que esta es la persona, por demasiadas cosas que vamos a seguir investigando. So the answer is pretty much that there's a lot of leads that we have here that identifies this individual as the person who committed this tragedy, and we have enough to be able to move forward in progress, and we're very confident that that is the individual that committed the crime.
You had one follow-up here? Or you go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
¿Por qué no llamarlo sospechoso entonces? ¿Y qué le dice a la comunidad que está angustiada?
So why don't we call him a suspect, and what do we tell the community that's nervous? So la respuesta es, verdaderamente, estamos llamando a una persona de interés, ¿verdad? Porque necesitamos crear un caso para poder llevarlo a la justicia y presentarlo al fiscal. Y le decimos a la comunidad que realmente estamos en un trabajo y esta es una prioridad en este momento y una responsabilidad de que pongamos un caso completo para poder llevarlo a la justicia.
Can I just jump in here, Mayor, with your permission? I want to come back to your question about that name. And I know the name that you're asking about because a member of the media asked me about it. I am familiar with it. I wasn't familiar with it when the media member asked me about it. I think it was either CBS or NBC. I asked my team about it. I think this is an area where caution is really necessary. There are lots of reasons why a page might be taken down, particularly if there's chatter out there about, to your question, Amanda, about words that were spoken. It's easy to jump from someone saying words that were spoken to what those words are, to a particular name that reflects a motive targeting a particular person. That's a really dangerous road to go down. Really dangerous. If that name meant anything to this investigation, we would be out looking for that person. We would let you know we were looking for that person. You know, again, I think it's just a really dangerous road to go down. I know that in today's age, there are lots of things that people read into things. It's just a dangerous thing to do. And I would leave it to us to identify persons of interest and let us run them down. What the public can do for us today is help us figure out who this guy is. And we hope to have more information out that will help you do that, help us do that.
You have a follow-up here.
I do, just
Yeah.
very, very quickly. It was further to my colleague's question, but you have answered most of it. But just in regards to the rumors that are circulating as well about the motive here, do you have any information regarding the rumors that a particular professor was being targeted?
Yeah, there's no information that the investigative team has about motive. Zero. There's nothing about, even if taking at face value what one or two witnesses may have said about what something was said, okay, and there are many witnesses that say nothing was said, there's nothing about what we know was perhaps said that indicates any kind of motive that is related at all to ethnicity or or political outlook or culture. There's nothing at all that we know right now about that. And I think that is a dangerous road to go down, particularly in today's environment.
Patrick has a follow-up.
Does the fact that the satchel is in some videos and not in others, and his disappearance around Governor, either indicate that there's a vehicle involved or one of the houses involved, that he picks up the satchel or gets off the satchel? What does that tell us, the fact that he disappears if there's a vehicle?
Those are the actions of a criminal, pretty much. I'll tell you you're right, and that's something that we're looking at. As you can see in the video, the satchel's on, sometimes it's not on. He has a heavy coat on, he has something in front of his abdomen. He could have hit the satchel, and something in the instance that we have, we'll continue to investigate. It's complex, but we'll continue to investigate as we go
Chris
along.
has got a follow-up. Chris has got a follow-up. Chris has got a follow-up.
Or are you assuming, like in Lewiston, Maine, after 4 days, the suspect had taken his own life? So if you just set the microphone, are you assuming right now that you're showing these videos that this is a suspect after 72 hours that's still alive? Or do you have dogs and, thermal imaging from helicopters overhead that are looking for a person that's taken their own life?
Yeah, we're using a lot of resources. As soon as we get a lead, we continue to follow through with it. An investigation, I mentioned the other day, they start here and they lead in a different direction. So we're there. Yes, you're right. We use dogs. Yes, if we have a lead on something and we think that we need to go back and search it again, we need to re-interview, we're doing all that.
Chris, you've got the last question. Go.
This is for the Colonel and the AG. The mayor had noted with the Boston Globe podcast that there were setbacks earlier in this investigation. Would you also say that initial detention with that first person of interest, would you also categorize that as a setback?
Well, the mayor and I agree on nearly everything. But we look at this case maybe from different backgrounds and experiences, perhaps. Certainly, the mayor has had many great experiences that I've never had, leading a city, for example. Well, I would not characterize it as a setback. The way I would characterize it is, it was a lead that had to be run to ground. And the person, as that lead was run to ground, there was an initial period where that lead looked very promising. But there was still physical evidence that had to be analyzed. And once it was analyzed, it was clear that that person was not a person involved here. But that's not unusual in investigations like this, and that's happening as we speak. We are developing people of interest, and some we quickly rule out, others we quickly rule in. And when I say persons of interest, people that could be this guy based on other evidence. So I would not view it as a setback. I mean, I think, frankly, the police work there and the analytical work that had to be taken out of state and brought back very quickly was very well done. Certainly was it a disappointment for those of us who hoped we could wrap this case quickly for the benefit of the Brown community and the people of Providence or Rhode Island, of course. But I don't know that I would use the setback, but I think maybe those words don't, but maybe what I'm saying is not all that different from what the mayor said. But I look at it as good police work while other work was going on.
We will be back tomorrow with further updates unless there is a meaningful update. Again, if you are not yet on the press list, please see Camille or Julie to my left, and they can add you to the list. Thank you all very much.